They didn't see it coming. Not like this. For years, world leaders sat in their high towers, confident, untouchable, certain that Iran would never rise beyond the shadows of sanctions and isolation. But something shifted. Quietly, patiently, and with precision, Iran built its strength. Not just in weapons, but in alliances, in technology, in conviction. Now the world watches in stunned silence. Why? Because Iran's retaliation wasn't just a response. It was a message that echoed from boardrooms in Washington to war rooms in Tel Aviv. This isn't the old Middle East. This is a new chapter where the underestimated are no longer silent and the powerful no longer feel safe. If you think this is just about politics, think again. This is about awakening, about how one nation stood tall against every odd and made the world stop and listen. Stay with me until the end, because by the time this speech is over, you won't see the world the same way again. The rise of the shadow network refers to the quiet but deliberate strategy Iran has employed over the last 2 decades to build alliances that are unconventional, often invisible to mainstream headlines, but incredibly potent. Rather than depending solely on state-to-state diplomacy, Iran invested in relationships with ideological movements, resistance groups, and marginalized states that share a common goal: standing against Western domination and defending sovereignty at all. These alliances are not always signed on paper or declared in press conferences. They're rooted in shared trauma, shared resistance, and a mutual understanding that survival in today's geopolitical battlefield requires unity beyond borders. Iran saw what many nations didn't, that traditional military strength alone no longer defines power. The real strength lies in networks that can move quietly, strike unexpectedly, and influence globally without marching openly. Across the Middle East and beyond, Iran connected with movements that had been pushed to the sidelines. Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, elements within Iraq's popular mobilization forces, Palestinian resistance factions, and even emerging anti-Western sentiment in Africa and Latin America. These became more than allies. They became extensions of a larger ideological ecosystem. Iran provided more than weapons or money. It offered purpose, intelligence, strategy, and a unifying belief in resistance. This ecosystem is not controlled by Iran as a puppet master, but coordinated like a constellation. Each node acts independently when needed, yet in times of crisis, they move as one. This is what the world is now witnessing. When this shadow network activates, it doesn't look like a conventional war. It looks like pressure on multiple fronts. Drone strikes from Yemen, rockets from Lebanon, resistance in Gaza, uprisings in Iraq, cyber warfare from unexpected sources, and diplomatic resistance in international arenas. It's a hybrid form of power projection, and it's what has global leaders on edge, because they know this isn't just Iran anymore. It's Iran empowered by a dozen other hands, hearts, and voices, ready to rise when called. And the moment these alliances move in unison, it signals a shift. A movement born from silence now speaks with thunder. This is not just war, it's strategic awakening. And the ones who underestimate it are the ones now rushing to understand how deep this network really goes. For years, Iran was portrayed as a nation cornered, sanctioned, and isolated, a country clinging to old ideals with no allies and no path forward. But beneath that narrative, something else was unfolding. Iran was shifting, adapting, and reaching outward, not in the way Western powers expected, but in a strategic, calculated manner that redefined what global integration looks like. No longer the lonely outcast, Iran slowly stitched itself into regional and international frameworks through diplomacy rooted not in submission but in mutual respect and shared interests. It began building bridges with countries that had grown weary of Western pressure and interference. And those bridges weren't just political, they were economic, military, and deeply ideological. Iran reached out to Russia with a shared stance on resisting U.S. influence. It strengthened its ties with China through major trade agreements and oil partnerships, including entry into the Belt and Road Initiative, which placed Iran on the path of economic resurgence. It joined hands with Venezuela and other nations under sanctions to create an alternative financial dialogue, one that could survive outside the U.S. dollar system. Slowly but surely, Iran was building a new form of integration, not with the dominant Western bloc, but with a coalition of defiant voices seeking independence from the old order. These weren't just deals, they were lifelines, interwoven threads that formed a safety net capable of absorbing economic shocks and neutralizing diplomatic isolation. While the media continued to echo the narrative of Iran being boxed in, Iranian diplomats were holding closed-door meetings in Central Asia, Africa, and South America. These weren't just symbolic. They were building the architecture for a post-dollar, multipolar world. Iran's participation in BRICS dialogues and its increased engagement with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization signaled that it wasn't begging for a seat at someone else's table. It was helping build a new one. Countries that had once watched Iran cautiously from a distance began warming to the idea that Iran's resistance was not a threat, it was a blueprint. Strategic integration also came through defense cooperation and technology transfer. From drone technology to cyber capabilities, Iran was no longer merely importing tools, it was exporting strategy. It began training, advising, and even innovating alongside nations and groups seeking self-sufficiency. This expanded its relevance and influence far beyond its borders. And most importantly, this new integration was rooted in resilience. It wasn't dependent on the favor of any superpower. It was forged in hardship, tested through conflict, and proven through unwavering patience. Iran did not just survive isolation, it transformed it into a new kind of relevance, one that now challenges the very foundation of Western diplomatic control. It didn't knock louder on the old doors. It built a new house entirely and invited those tired of subjugation to come inside. Iran's use of proxy forces is often misunderstood as simple outsourcing of conflict, but the reality is far more intricate and strategic. What the world calls proxies, Iran sees as pillars of a shared resistance. These groups, whether Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, or the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, are not merely tools. They're trusted allies in a broader ideological and strategic alliance. Each of them brings regional knowledge, localized influence, and combat experience tailored to their terrain. Iran doesn't just hand over weapons, it shares intelligence, operational tactics, and long-term vision. This network of forces allows Iran to extend its strategic reach without ever crossing a border directly. It is a playbook of asymmetric power where precision and unpredictability replace brute military strength. The genius of Iran's relationship with these groups lies in their decentralized coordination. They do not operate under strict Iranian command, but act in synchronized spirit. When tensions rise or threats emerge, these forces respond in their own localized ways, but the timing, the messaging, and the impact often echo across regions. This creates the illusion of spontaneous eruptions, when in fact they are part of a larger strategic rhythm. And this is what truly unsettles global powers. They cannot pinpoint a single command center, nor can they easily predict when or where the next ripple will strike. Iran has built a storm with many eyes and many arms, each capable of creating turbulence in different arenas simultaneously. What makes these alliances even more potent is the moral and ideological grounding behind them. These groups are not just fighting for Iran. They're fighting for their own people, their own dignity, and their vision of justice. That alignment of purpose gives their movements a resilience that surpasses financial support or political backing. They are deeply rooted in communities that see them not as foreign agents, but as defender. And in war, in politics, in resistance, such grassroots legitimacy is more powerful than most weapons. The world witnessed this coordination when Iran's allies began activating across multiple borders in response to regional escalations. Rockets launched from Lebanon, drones from Yemen, militias mobilizing in Iraq, and cyber messages spreading across social platforms, all moved in harmony without a single Iranian soldier on the ground. This is asymmetric warfare elevated to a level that no conventional army can match. It's hard to bomb out a network that lives in ideology and breathes in unity. The proxy forces are Iran's shield, sword, and shadow. They're not just deterrents, they are an extension of Iran's strategic vision for a new regional order. While traditional powers rely on fleets and bases, Iran relies on belief, strategy, and partnerships that cannot be easily erased. That is why this alliance of movements continues to grow, evolve, and threaten the status quo, not through conquest, but through coordination born of conviction. Iran's challenge to the global economic system is one of the most underestimated fronts in modern geopolitical warfare. While the world focused on missiles and sanctions, Iran was carefully constructing an economic resistance strategy that would slowly chip away at the dominance of the US dollar and Western-controlled financial systems. This isn't just about avoiding sanctions, it's about rewriting the rules of global commerce. Iran's move toward de-dollarization is not isolated. It's part of a broader wave among nations in the global south who are questioning the fairness of a system where one country's currency controls global trade. In this struggle, Iran has become both a symbol and a strategist, forging economic alliances that offer a way out for many countries tired of being economically blackmailed. A major shift came when Iran began conducting trade using alternative currencies like the Chinese yuan and Russian ruble. Bilateral agreements with China, Russia, India, Venezuela, and several Central Asian countries allowed Iran to continue oil exports, bypassing the need for SWIFT and U.S.-controlled financial systems. Barter systems and gold-backed transactions also re-emerged as practical tools of economic survival. But Iran didn't just stop at survival. It began to play offense. It joined discussions in BRICS about creating a new reserve currency that could eventually rival the dollar. It began working with partners on blockchain-based financial systems and digital currencies designed to be immune to Western sanctions. These were not dreams, they were real plans, moving into real execution. Another critical element of Iran's economic rebellion is the building of alternative trade routes. As sanctions choked traditional maritime exports, Iran invested in land-based corridors through Central Asia, connecting to China, Russia, and even Europe through more indirect routes. The International North-South Transport Corridor became a symbol of this strategy, offering shorter, more secure pathways that reduced reliance on the choke points controlled by Western allies. Iran also tapped into regional partnerships with Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon to create an economic access that could withstand external pressure and continue trading goods, services, and energy. Iran's economic defiance didn't just inspire states, it inspired movements. It showed that resistance was not only about guns and flags, but about currencies, contracts, and cargo ships. Nations that feared isolation began looking at Iran's model of economic endurance and started adopting similar strategies. Iran became a case study in how to build parallel systems, how to survive and thrive without the approval of Washington. In doing so, Iran didn't just protect its own economy, it helped lay the groundwork for a multipolar economic order. And now, as more countries lose faith in the old systems, Iran's early investments in economic independence are paying off. It's not just surviving, it's leading, one transaction at a time, toward a future where no single empire holds the keys to the world's wealth. Iran's technological evolution, especially in the fields of drones and cyber warfare, has dramatically shifted the balance of power in the region and beyond. For decades, the assumption in global politics was that high-tech warfare belonged to the West, stealth jets, precision missiles, satellite intelligence. But Iran turned that assumption on its head through reverse engineering and indigenous development. While sanctions were meant to cripple its technological progress, Iran used them as motivation to become self-reliant. Today, Iranian-made drones are not only feared across conflict zones, but they are also being exported and emulated. These aren't just surveillance tools. They're battlefield game changers, capable of carrying precision strikes, operating with long-range capabilities, and disrupting traditional military doctrines. Iranian drones, like the Shahed series, have proven their effectiveness in numerous conflicts, from the Arabian Peninsula to Eastern Europe, often operating at a fraction of the cost of Western counterparts. This has changed the economics of war. It has allowed Iran and its allies to conduct sophisticated military operations without the need for massive air fleets or sprawling bases. These drones, launched from unexpected locations, can reach targets hundreds of miles away, often bypassing advanced defense systems. This asymmetry terrifies conventional powers because it renders their expensive systems less effective and exposes vulnerabilities they thought were covered. Iran's drone strategy is not just tactical, it's symbolic. It represents a shift from dependence on superpowers to localized strength. But the technological battlefield doesn't stop in the sky. Iran has become a serious player in cyber warfare, building a digital army capable of infiltrating, disabling, and disrupting systems from afar. State-linked cyber units have targeted infrastructure, military networks, and even financial institutions. These cyber operations are not always public, but their impact is felt in warning systems, defense databases, and sensitive communications across the globe. Iran's cyber capabilities have evolved to the point where they are now part of its deterrence doctrine. Just like a missile or a drone, a keystroke from Tehran can cause chaos thousands of miles away. This invisible front of war is where Iran has found true parity with nations that once believed themselves untouchable. What makes Iran's technological ascent more impressive is how it has shared this knowledge with its allies. Resistance movements across the region now deploy Iranian-designed drones and rely on Iranian cyber strategies. This has created a ripple effect, empowering smaller forces to stand toe-to-toe with larger militaries. It has also made Iran a central hub of tech-based resistance, a nation that others turn to not just for ideology, but for hardware, code, and expertise. In a world where the next war may not begin with a bomb, but with a data breach or a drone swarm, Iran has secured its place as a formidable player. Its enemies now realize they are no longer dealing with a sanctioned relic. They are confronting a modern, capable, and evolving force with tools that reach far beyond the battlefield. Iran's spiritual and ideological influence has always been its most underestimated weapon. While military hardware can be measured and economic alliances tracked, the power of belief, of unshakable conviction in a cause, cannot be mapped or contained. Iran is not just a country with borders and missiles. It is a symbol of defiance that echoes across the Muslim world and beyond. Its ideology is not confined to Shiism, or it is rooted in a broader narrative: resistance to oppression, dignity in independence, and the right of people to choose their path without foreign domination. This is the message Iran projects in its speeches, its media, its Friday sermons, and its support for liberation movements worldwide. And it's a message that resonates deeply with the millions who feel voiceless under global systems tilted against them. Iran's ability to inspire is not about coercion. It's about conviction. Its leaders speak a language that taps into historical memory, of colonialism, of broken promises, of stolen resources, and cultural erasure. When Iran supports Palestine, when it speaks about Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, or even oppressed minorities in Africa and Asia, it does so with a moral clarity that many find missing in Western discourse. That clarity turns into loyalty, and loyalty into a movement. People don't just support Iran for political gain. They feel a spiritual alignment with what it stands for. Even in countries where the governments may oppose Iran, there are masses of people who admire its courage, its refusal to bow down, and its vision of a world where the oppressed are not abandoned. This ideological reach is amplified through Iran's media network, cultural exchanges, and institutions that educate thousands of students from different countries each year. These are future leaders, thinkers, and influencers who carry with them the Iranian worldview long after they leave. And while drones and missiles may dominate headlines, it is this undercurrent of ideological influence that quietly builds Iran's power. It is the fuel that drives its proxy networks, the passion that sustains resistance movements, and the faith that turns sanctions into pride. What truly alarms world powers is that Iran's ideological model cannot be bombed or sanctioned out of existence. It survives in mosques, in poetry, in political art, in student debates, and in the hearts of everyday people who may never visit Iran, but see in it a beacon of standing tall. It is this intangible yet unstoppable force that turns a regional power into a global symbol. Iran's spiritual narrative has become a thread that connects the struggles of people across continents, not by enforcing conformity, but by honoring dignity. And in a world where narratives win hearts before armies win battles, Iran's voice is growing louder, more defiant, and more unified than ever. What we are witnessing is not just a regional confrontation. It's the unfolding of a global shift. Iran's rise is not rooted in aggression, but in strategy, patience, and a deep connection to something bigger than politics. It's not just about missiles or militias. It's about independence in thought, resilience under pressure, and the refusal to kneel before powers that once dictated the fate of nations without question, whether through its silent alliances, economic defiance, technological evolution, or ideological depth. Iran has proven that true strength isn't measured by how loud you roar, but by how firm you stand when the world expects you to fall. As leaders scramble and world powers recalculate, one thing is certain: the balance is tilting, and it's tilting toward those who stand for themselves, their people, and their principles. Iran didn't just retaliate. It reminded the world that it's no longer a spectator in its own story. And that is what truly shakes the halls of power. Good luck and thank you message. To everyone watching, thank you for giving your time, your focus, and your open mind. The truth is often buried under noise, but today you chose to listen. May you continue to seek, to question, and to stand for what is right, even when the world stands against you. Stay strong, stay wise, and may you always walk with courage. Good luck, and may peace and clarity guide your journey.